The moment my aunt's eyes landed on me across the hotel lobby, she stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth stayed open, the words just gone. She looked at me, then at the man standing beside me, then back at me, and for the first time in 41 years of my life, my aunt had absolutely nothing to say. I'll come back to that moment. But first, you need to understand how we got there. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, in a house that always smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and whatever my mother was slow cooking on a Sunday. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. My father worked at the nickel refinery until his back gave out, and after that my mother picked up double shifts at the hospital laundry. There were 4 of us kids. I was the second oldest, the quiet one, the one who never caused any trouble and therefore never got any attention. My older brother got the praise because he was the eldest. My younger sister got the adoration because she was the baby and beautiful in that effortless way that made strangers stop my mother in grocery stores. My youngest brother got the patience and the coddling because he'd had a rough start. Born early, spent his first weeks in a NICU incubator, and our parents never quite stopped treating him like he was still fragile 20 years later. And then there was me. I was the one who did the dishes without being asked. I was the one who helped my brother with his homework and made sure my sister got to her dance lessons on time when my mother was running late. I was the one who filled out my own OSAP forms at 16 because my parents were busy, and got myself to every parent-teacher interview by forging permission slips because nobody else remembered they existed. I wasn't neglected exactly. I was just invisible in the way that competent, self-sufficient people sometimes become invisible. If you never fall apart, nobody rushes over to put you back together. My aunt was the worst of it. My mother's older sister, loud and opinionated, and the kind of woman who could walk into any room and immediately locate the person she wanted to diminish. She had a gift for it. She found the soft spot and pressed, always with a smile, always framed as concern. When I was 12, she told me I had my father's build, which was not a compliment. When I was 16 and got a summer job at a call center, she told everyone at Thanksgiving that I was working a phone job, like it was something to be pitied. When I got into Carleton at 18, she said, "Good for you, that should be manageable," as though I'd cleared a very low bar. She had 2 daughters who were, in her telling, remarkable. My cousin Felicity had become a dental hygienist in Mississauga and was married to a man who sold commercial real estate. My cousin Dawn had done a college diploma in interior decorating and was, my aunt would inform anyone who would stand still long enough, basically an interior designer. Every family gathering was a quiet competition that only my aunt was playing, and somehow I was always losing it, even when I didn't know the game was on. I left Sudbury at 22 with my Carleton economics degree and a job offer in Toronto. I didn't tell anyone except my mother. I drove down the 400 on a Tuesday morning in October with everything I owned in the back of a rented pickup truck, and I felt, for the first time, like I could breathe. The next 15 years were not glamorous. They were early mornings and spreadsheets and learning the difference between the kind of risk that breaks you and the kind that builds something. I worked at a mid-size financial advisory firm for 6 years. I learned everything I could. I asked questions that probably annoyed people. I stayed late not because anyone asked me to, but because I was genuinely trying to understand how money moved, how businesses breathed, where the pressure points were. When I was 29, I made my first small investment in a commercial property in Hamilton with 2 colleagues. It was a strip mall, half vacant, ugly as anything, on a street that was either going to be gentrified or abandoned. We bet on gentrified, we were right. We sold our stake 3 years later and made enough that I didn't have to think quite so carefully about every grocery run. I kept going. I kept reinvesting. I was careful and patient, and I made some mistakes and I learned from them. By the time I was 38, I had stakes in 4 commercial properties across Ontario and was a named partner in a boutique real estate investment firm with offices in Toronto and Ottawa. We were not a household name. We didn't need to be. We worked with pension funds and institutional clients and the kind of quiet, serious money that doesn't need to announce itself. My family, for the most part, had no idea. Not because I was hiding it, I'd mentioned it, vaguely. I said I worked in commercial real estate investment, and my mother said, "Oh, that's nice." And my aunt, the one time I'd tried to explain it properly at a Christmas dinner, talked right over me to describe the renovation Felicity and her husband were doing on their Mississauga split level. So I stopped explaining. It wasn't bitterness exactly. It was just, why would I keep offering something nobody wanted? I went home for Christmas and Thanksgiving when I could, and I sat at the table and I answered questions about whether I was seeing anyone and whether I'd thought about settling down, and I smiled and ate my turkey and drove back to Toronto and got on with my life. The call came on a Thursday in February, the kind of grey Sudbury February that makes you understand why people move to Vancouver. My cousin Dawn was getting married. A destination wedding, my aunt announced, somewhere warm, because Dawn deserves something special. The venue was a resort in Montego Bay, Jamaica. My aunt mentioned twice that it was all-inclusive for the guests, as though this was a great sacrifice they were making for us. I was invited. Somewhat. My aunt called my mother to tell her, and my mother relayed the information to me, which gave you a sense of where I stood in the family communication chain. I was asked if I would be able to make it in the tone of someone who assumes you probably won't. I said I'd be there. What nobody in my family knew, what I hadn't mentioned because nobody had asked, and because I'd genuinely forgotten it was relevant, was that the resort in Montego Bay was one of our portfolio properties. Not one I'd been involved in acquiring personally. My firm had brought in a Jamaican hospitality group as co-investors 2 years prior and taken a minority stake in a boutique resort that was undergoing renovation. I'd been down twice for due diligence meetings, met the general manager, walked the property. It was a beautiful place. To 12 acres private beach, the kind of quiet luxury that attracts people who have money and don't feel the need to prove it. I am not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what my aunt didn't know when she booked my cousin's wedding at my firm's property. I flew into Montego Bay on a Thursday, a day before most of the family arrived. The general manager, a warm and extremely capable man I'll call Patrick, not his real name but close enough, met me at the resort entrance and shook my hand and said it was good to have me back. He walked me through the renovation updates, showed me the new pool terrace, told me the event team was looking forward to the weekend. We had lunch at the main restaurant and talked through some outstanding items on the investment side. It was a normal business trip except that at the end of the weekend my cousin was getting married here. The family arrived Friday afternoon. I was sitting on my terrace with a coffee when my phone buzzed. My mother, saying they were at the front desk. I went down to meet them. My aunt was the first person I saw. She was standing at the reception desk in a wide-brimmed hat and a floral blouse, peering at the check-in process with the expression of someone who expects to find fault and is prepared to wait for it. My cousin Dawn was beside her, already pink from the short walk from the shuttle, laughing at something on her phone. Dawn's fiancé, a quiet and decent man I'd only met once before, was managing the luggage. My mother saw me first and waved. My aunt turned and looked me up and down. I was in a sundress, no luggage in hand, clearly not just arrived, and said, "Oh, you're already here. How early did you get in?" "Yesterday," I said. "I had some meetings." She made a face that wasn't quite a frown. "Meetings? Here?" "Work thing," I said, and left it at that. She nodded slowly the way she did when she was filing something away. Then she turned back to the desk and resumed observing the check-in with critical eyes. The welcome dinner Friday night was held on the terrace, overlooking the water. It was beautiful, genuinely, the kind of evening where the sky goes 6 different colors before it goes dark, and the air smells like salt and frangipani, and even people who have been quietly annoyed at each other for decades relax slightly. My aunt sat at the head of the family table and held court. She told the story of how she and Dawn had found this resort. Completely on our own, we just did the research, and how she had negotiated some upgrades for the wedding party. I looked down at my rum punch and did not say anything. Dawn's future mother-in-law was at the dinner too. Her name was Beverly, and she was a retired judge from Halifax who had the kind of quiet authority that needs no performance. She wore a cream linen blazer and small gold earrings, and she asked precise, intelligent questions about everything. I liked her immediately. Beverly and I ended up talking for a long stretch of the evening. We'd been seated beside each other, which I suspected was an accident since I was not exactly a central figure in the seating plan. We talked about Halifax, which I'd visited twice for work and liked enormously. We talked about the Maritimes property market, which she'd been watching with some interest. She asked what I did and I told her, plainly, the way I'd learned to say it, and she asked a few follow-up questions that told me she understood what I was describing. My aunt, from 3 seats down, interjected. "Lily does something with property," she said, waving a hand. "Real estate agent, is it?" "Investment," I said. "Commercial real estate investment." Right, my aunt said, in the voice of someone confirming that a thing is small. She's always been good with numbers. She turned back to Beverly. Our Dawn now, she designed the interiors for their entire home. She has a real eye. Beverly smiled politely and turned back to me. Where are your current holdings? She asked. We talked for another 20 minutes. My aunt stopped trying to redirect the conversation after the first 3 attempts didn't work. The wedding day was Saturday. It was everything a destination wedding is supposed to be, hot and golden and slightly chaotic in a way that gets smoothed over by the fact that everyone is wearing linen and holding tropical drinks. Dawn looked genuinely lovely. Her husband cried a little during the vows, which is always the right thing to do. The reception was in the resort's main pavilion, open on 3 sides to the ocean breeze. Patrick had arranged everything beautifully. The flowers, the lighting, the way the tables were set. I complimented him quietly on my way in, and he thanked me and said the team had been looking forward to it. My aunt found me mid-afternoon about an hour into the reception. I was standing near the edge of the pavilion with a glass of wine, watching the water. You know, she said, coming to stand beside me in the way that always meant she had something to say. I was talking to one of the staff earlier, the girl at the spa desk. She paused for effect. She thought you were a travel agent. Someone who books groups. I turned to look at her. What did you tell her? I told her you were family. She smiled. I didn't know what else to say. You're a bit hard to explain, Lily. I looked at her for a moment. What does that mean? Well, she tilted her head. You're not married. You don't have children. You work in some investment thing. Nobody quite knows what that means day to day. She said it pleasantly, like she was observing the weather. It's not a criticism. I'm just saying you're hard to place. I nodded slowly. I didn't say anything, what I could have said, that I co-owned the property we were standing on, that my firm had a board meeting about this resort 3 months ago, and I'd presented the renovation ROI projections, that the flowers on every table had been approved through a vendor contract that I'd signed off on, that Patrick, who had just refilled my aunt's champagne glass with a warm smile, had my direct number in his phone. I didn't say any of it. I just let her stand there, satisfied, and I looked out at the water. The moment happened 30 minutes later. Patrick came to find me. He did it quietly and professionally, which was exactly what I would have expected, came to where I was standing, excused himself to the person I was talking to, and leaned in to tell me that the resort's director of operations had arrived unexpectedly from Kingston and wanted to say hello. He was in the lobby. I went. I spent about 15 minutes with the director, a sharp and energetic woman named Sandra who wanted to discuss an expansion proposal we'd been reviewing. We talked numbers. I made some notes in my phone. It was quick and purposeful and entirely unremarkable to me. What I didn't know was that my aunt had followed me out. Not all the way. She'd stopped near the entrance to the pavilion, close enough to see me in the lobby, close enough to see me shaking hands with Sandra, to see Patrick hovering nearby, to see the way Sandra was talking to me, not the way you talk to a guest, but the way you talk to someone whose opinion you're trying to get. I came back into the pavilion, and my aunt was standing exactly where I'd left her, except her expression had changed. The comfortable authority had gone somewhere. She was looking at me the way you look at a thing, when you're trying to figure out if it's the same thing you thought it was 5 minutes ago. Who was that woman? She asked. Director of Operations, I said. You know the Director of Operations? We've worked together a bit, I said. The firm I'm with has a stake in this property. She stared at me. What do you mean a stake? Investment stake, minority share. We brought in a hospitality partner 2 years ago. I kept my voice completely level, the way you keep your voice when you're delivering information that is not to you surprising. I've been here twice before. It's a good property, nice renovation, silence. My aunt's mouth opened and then closed. She looked at the pavilion, at the flowers, at the lighting, at the tables, at the whole beautiful machine of this day. And then she looked back at me with an expression I had never seen on her face in my entire life. Beverly appeared at my elbow. I think she'd been close enough to hear. She raised her champagne glass and said, very calmly, Lily, I meant to ask earlier, the firm you're with, are they looking at anything in the Maritimes right now? My nephew's been trying to find good partners for a mixed-use development in Dartmouth. I turned to her. Send me his information, I said. I'll set up a call for when we're both back. Beverly nodded and took a sip of her champagne and looked at my aunt with an expression that was entirely pleasant and revealed nothing. My aunt said nothing for the rest of the conversation. She excused herself a few minutes later. I watched her go. She found my mother near the dessert table. I couldn't hear what she said, but I watched my mother's face, the small, quiet surprise, the contained pleasure that mothers try to hide when they find out a child who was overlooked is doing better than anyone knew. My mother looked across the pavilion at me. I raised my glass slightly. She turned back to my aunt and said something I'll never know. At the end of the night, after the first dances and the speeches and the cake, I found Dawn sitting alone for a minute by the edge of the pavilion, shoes off, watching the ocean. "Did you know?" she said when I sat down beside her. "Know what?" She gave me a look. "You know what?" I was quiet for a moment. "No, I mean, I knew the firm had a stake here. I didn't book the wedding. I didn't set this up. I didn't even remember honestly until you announced the venue." She nodded slowly. Then she smiled. A real one, not the performance smile she'd been wearing all day. "Mom called you hard to place." "She did. That was mean." "It was," I said, "but it's okay." Dawn was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. "I've always just kind of gone along with how she talks about you. I don't know why. It was easier." I didn't say it was fine because it wasn't entirely fine. I just said, "You looked beautiful today," he cried, "which means he's good." She laughed. "He did, didn't he?" She leaned her head briefly on my shoulder. "I'm glad you were here." I stayed on the terrace for a while after everyone else drifted inside. The water was very dark and very still, and the lights from the pavilion made a long pale rectangle on the surface. Patrick came by and asked if I needed anything. I said no, I was fine, just sitting for a bit. He nodded and then he said, professionally and warmly, "It's been a lovely evening. The family is very nice. Some of them," I said. He smiled and walked back inside. The next morning, at the breakfast buffet, my aunt sat down across from me. She had a plate of fruit and a coffee, and the expression of someone composing themselves. "I didn't realize," she said finally. "About your work." "I know," I said. "You never explained it properly." I looked at her for a moment. There were 17 things I could have said to that. I chose none of them. "Good coffee here," I said instead. The supplier they switched to last year made a big difference. She looked at me. "How do you know what supplier they switched to?" "Board meeting," I said. "About 8 months ago. It came up in the operations report." She picked up her coffee cup. She put it down. She picked up a piece of melon and didn't eat it. "Well," she said finally, "I'm glad it all worked out for you." I nodded. "I think it did." I flew back to Toronto on Monday morning. The flight was just under 3 hours, and I spent most of it working through emails and reviewing a term sheet and new acquisition in Kitchener. When we landed and I turned my phone back on, there was a message from Beverly with her nephew's contact information and a short note. "He's sharp. I think you'll get along. Safe travels." I wrote back and said I'd reach out that week. I thought about calling my mother when I got home, but I was tired in the specific way you get tired when something has been resolved that you didn't fully realize was still unresolved. I put my bag down and made a cup of tea and stood at my window looking out at the city. The October gray of it, the particular dense ordinariness of a Toronto Monday evening, and I felt something I didn't have a clean word for. Not triumph, not vindication exactly, something quieter than that. My whole life I had been the one in the room who was hard to place. The one without a story that fit into anybody else's idea of a story. I didn't marry young or move back home or do the things that make you legible to the people who raised you. I just kept working and learning and building something that didn't look like anything from the outside until suddenly it looked like quite a lot. The woman at the spa desk had thought I was a travel agent. My aunt had thought I was someone good with numbers who had never fully added up to anything. Beverly had asked a follow-up question. Patrick had my number in his phone. You don't get to choose which of those people you become to the people around you, but you get to choose what you build and what you know and who you call when the wheels touch down. I called Beverly's nephew on Wednesday. We had a good conversation. There was something worth pursuing in Dartmouth, it turned out. I booked a flight to Halifax for the following month.